Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop new episodes every Tuesday.
So, on today's episode, we are very excited to have a creative entrepreneur that wears a lot of hats, Derrik Diza. Welcome, Derrik.
Thank you for having me. I am stoked to be here.
Yes, we're so excited to have you. We look forward to discussing your journey, how Influential Walls got started, and some of the lessons you've learned along the way. But real quick before we dive in, let's go ahead and share a little bit more about you and your background for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work quite yet.
Not yet, yeah. So Derrik is the founder of Influential Walls, a collective of top-tier muralists creating large-scale murals for innovative brands and schools. Influential Walls is more than just about murals. It's about transforming the starving artist mentality and offering opportunities for artists of all ages through mentorship and collaboration. They have worked with numerous schools in California and painted for companies like the Boston Red Sox, Rumble, and Accenture.
And of course, that's a very formal introduction for our listeners. But Derrik, how would you describe your work to someone who has never seen or heard of it before?
Yeah, so thank you guys for the warm intro, by the way. Appreciate it. Everything about Influential Walls is about making artists rich. That's like the primary reason why we exist is to help artists make money. So it's kind of reflected in a number of different ways. So that happens with like at first I thought that was going to happen more working with the youth because I thought like when I was young, I had no idea that you could make money as an artist. So why don't we go to schools and paint murals at schools and then teach kids about business education? Like, hey, did you know that you can actually charge like 10, 20, $30,000 for these murals and teach them things about profit, marketing, yourself as an artist, even things like collaborating and negotiating. So we ended up like building out a lot of those exercises and stuff for schools. But the changes that we're looking to make at the school level, I guess, didn't translate almost like they didn't translate to the creative economy as quickly as we wanted them to, which is why we kind of started leaning into mentorship, working with adult artists, teaching them the ways that we actually grew, the way that I grew Influential Walls basically, and showing them kind of a lot more about the business model and all the little fun nitty gritty things that go into being an artist and how many hats you have to wear. And that's just all across the board. So I've always been really big on automation and stuff like that and building teams. So I guess simply put, we're a collective of artists that want to help other artists succeed. And I think that's the simplest way to put it. But if you look at our artwork specifically, it's kind of like the crew can do anything. I mean, I have some artists that are illustrators, some artists that can do hyperrealism, some artists that are have very stylized work that's unique. People that were big on the graph scene. So yeah,
Runs
as
the
far as
gamut.
varies.
Yeah, we love that. We love that. Now digging in a little bit on the past real quick, just a quick second. You've shared before, on Instagram online that just a few years ago you were making TikToks and videos trying to sell your art, trying to sell some merch. What was that journey like in the early stages, pre mural?
Brutal. I think for every artist, right? I mean, the way I see it is the only way to get good at something is by putting in the reps, right? It's like the 10,000 hour rule. So at the beginning of every artist journey, like not just mine, I think every artist, right? It's like you don't really know. There's so much to learn at the beginning outside of just like elevating your work and making a product and then like bringing that product to market and figuring out like who am I going to sell this to? How do I actually attract that person? Okay, how do I price it? So at the beginning of my art career, it was I always told myself I actually wouldn't do art full time because I always thought that you would just be broke. And then I started kind of like just doing it for fun. And I was making some t-shirts and selling them and donating the proceeds back to a friend's foster home. And but I realized every time I printed shirts, they would sell out. So I was like, okay, so I'll just keep rolling with this and print more and more until they stop selling out or whatever. So at the beginning, I was doing a lot of TikToks to help drive the traffic. And I was lucky enough to be one of the early adopters of TikTok, like in 2020, when it wasn't like, okay, there's like thousands, hundreds of thousands of creators on the platform. I mean, now there's like
Mhm.
millions, I would assume, probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of creators on the platform. But I was on there as an early adopter and was doing all the transition videos. Like that was kind of my thing. I would do like show like my sketchbook and then like throw the sketchbook on the floor and turn into a shirt, and then throw the shirt at the wall, and then it would like turn into a mural or something like that. Like I was really big into all those transitions. And the traffic, like I was able to drive the traffic to the TikTok and also to the website, but it just didn't really translate to that much in profit because if you guys know or have tried before, or anyone listening to the podcast, if you sell clothing, it's not like you're gonna make a killing doing it unless you're selling units like crazy, right? You just gotta be like
Mhm.
turning them out like crazy because the margins aren't really there unless you're like at a really luxury brand like Supreme or um, you're doing like cut and sew sort of stuff. But I was just doing like drop shipping. So
Mhm.
for anyone not familiar with drop shipping, it's basically where the manufacturer handles the creation of the product and also the fulfillment, so the shipping of the product. So your job just becomes I design it and I market it, and then someone else handles the creating and the shipping process, which is great because you don't have to put up any money up front to buy like 50 units or 100 units of shirts and then sell them. But at the beginning, yeah, I started doing drop shipping and using TikTok to kind of basically make my job was basically TikTok, right? It was like if I drop 3 pieces of content every day, then I know I'll make sales by the end of the week. But it was like honestly pretty exhausting. Because I had to make so much content all the time. And then like I had to make sure that I was doing a new drop. And then yeah, and it's like drop shipping, you don't have as much quality control because you don't have the clothing in front of you. So it just goes straight to
Mhm.
your end consumer. And if your consumer has a problem with it, then you're kind of doing this like product support, not even knowing what sort of product they got. And yeah, it was a lot, and there wasn't a huge amount of profit in it, but it was so there was part of it that was still invigorating and fulfilling because I was like, wow, I have an art business and I'm making some money doing it. I mean, I'm still working a
Mhm.
job. I couldn't quit my job, but I was like, it's cool. Like I get to do art, I get to make some money. And at that time I was donating back to foster homes. So it's like, I feel like I'm making a small difference. It's not a huge amount of money because I didn't really have that much money, but yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's like a cool way to obviously, to your point, kind of hit every part of the art business. You're designing it, you're using another resource for production, but then also doing the marketing, doing the customer service after they get it. And so
Mhm.
relatively quick amount of time to go from 0 to 100 of having every aspect of the production line that you have to worry about and just troubleshoot and figure out. Which, as you mentioned before, is kind of at the beginning stages of anyone's career. It's really just drinking from the fire hose of learning things through mistakes or, okay, a customer has this question. Let me figure out the answer to that question because I genuinely don't know. And you're really just thrown into it. So that makes me curious though. When pivoting to murals, can you tell us about that first mural project that kind of changed things for you? Like, how'd you go from the production of t-shirts into mural projects?
Yeah. So Um, when I was doing t-shirts, I was also doing like shoes and skateboards and stuff. I was kind of just like an artist, kind of doing multiple things, but and I guess most of the money from the business came from the clothing. Um, and clothing was all digital art. So would sometimes just upload on Instagram just like a digital piece, not even like rendered on a piece of clothing, just like here's a digital piece I made, and I uploaded a digital piece, and a friend of mine basically like pulled the photo off Instagram and then removed the background and like photoshopped it onto a wall at this art exposition's like restroom. It was like a woman's restroom, and they sent me a photo and they're like, "Hey, we rendered this in the bathroom. We think it looks awesome. Can you paint it?" And I was like, uh, "I don't know. I've never done that before. Probably not." um, but they were like, "We want you to paint it," and we honestly, I have I feel like I owe a lot to his name was Ronnie. I owe a lot to Ronnie just because he like pushed me to paint the mural, even though I like kind of was hesitant to do it and was scared to do it because he was like, "You can do this. It's not that hard. Like you got it, and we'll pay you." And I mean, the pay we're talking like $300. So I was like, "Okay,
But
you'll
still,
pay for
at that
that."
time, you're like, that's a lot of t-shirts you would have
That is
had
a lot of
to
t-shirts.
sell to get that level of potential profit. You're like, okay, it's just a little glimmer of what is possible, even if it is on the much low scale of payment.
Well, it wasn't really like the $300 that really was the thing holding me back. It was really just like, I don't know if I can do this because I never paid a mural before, right? So I was like, I don't even know what sort of paint to use. Like, I used acrylic paint for that whole thing. I didn't even realize like you should be using latex paint. So I just used acrylic paint for the whole thing, and I was like, yeah, that $300 is probably going to go negative on it because I'm gonna have to buy so much acrylic paint. And he didn't like walk me through how to do that, even though he was basically a curator. But I didn't really ask him either. So I basically just gave in and was like, yeah, sure, I'll try to paint it. Watched a bunch of videos from 10 Hun, if you guys know 1000.
Yes.
Yeah, who else did I watch? Kipto, and I was watching all those guys that are kind of like on YouTube that did like they teach people how to get started painting murals. Um,
Mhm.
so watched a bunch of those videos, got a really cheap like $50 projector, and then did the thing. And then after that, like that went viral on TikTok. And also it was just like really cool painting large scale for the first time, right? Like I'm assuming most of your listeners probably have painted a handful of murals, but like for that being my first time, I was like, I think with everyone, when you do your first mural, you're like, whoa, I just did that. It was a huge
Mhm.
piece. So yeah, that's when I started like I guess leaning into murals more, but I didn't I was just gonna kind of like do all of the things. I was gonna do like clothing, murals, skateboards, like whatever I had fun doing until I met uh, an artist named Steve Martinez, who is actually part of my crew now. We work together a lot, and oh my gosh, he's making strides this year. Well, I mean, I think a lot of the crew is. I think we're growing together, which is really cool. But Steve told me that he worked for Apple, Lululemon and stuff. And then he started telling me like, yeah, you can make like, 20, 30, 40, 50K doing this. Then I was like, wait, one wall? And then that's when like my eyes lit up because I was like, oh, maybe I should be doing this only and not really doing the clothing. Because the way I saw it, I was like, okay, well, if I'm drop shipping the clothing, like it's not like I can just keep them up on the website if people order because they like my brand or like my visual brand, right? Like they'll come and they'll buy clothing after they see some of the murals or something. So I kind of just left that there, but I wasn't actively designing as much. But when he told me how much money he was making, then I started leaning into it a lot more and was like, how do I find more clients doing this? How do I negotiate higher? Like, how do I get to that 20, 30, 40K? And I think it's being exposed to that because I was only painting my third mural when he started talking to me about those numbers. I was like, whoa, that's insane. I need to be doing this. And that's kind of when the career went from like, I guess, artist slash designer to like muralist. That was like transition from artist to muralist. Then yeah, yeah, and then
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
So you started to see kind of the potential income, not just from obviously you have the finances, but also seeing the rewarding aspect of seeing your work on that large scale, learning the ropes from other artists of not using acrylic paint, using latex, how to get your margins higher to make more profit. Now, how did that transition pivot from muralist to a mural agency? Kind of that final piece, I feel like, of the narrative up until this point.
Yeah, so the transition from muralist to the agency owner happened as I was closing more murals and was like, all right, I sold a mural for 7K. Okay, now I sold a 9K mural. Now I sold a like $13,000 mural. Like I started like my first mural was for $300, and by the end of basically my first like whole calendar year, I was selling murals like on average for about 10 to 13K, and then was like, this is good. Like I'm happy making this much money. Like I can actually see myself quitting my job soon. Now, I wasn't doing it every month, but like the fact that I was able to almost every time I closed, just close for that amount because I just turned down the other jobs because I had a job at the time. So it's just like I don't want to like do these smaller jobs if I can make that much money in 2 or 3 weeks at my other job, why am I gonna do it here for
Hmm.
like that significant? So I was just like, I'm just gonna be a little more picky about my jobs. And then once I got to this point where I was like, okay, now we have like a few $10,000 murals regularly. I hired my virtual assistant and I started showing him my marketing, like how I set up all my marketing, and was like, I need to double the input so we can double the output. So I brought him in, I taught him as much as I could, and then we were like kind of doing this together, right? So now our marketing was doubled and the sales were following that trend. And because the sales were following that trend, I started just looking around and we were getting enough clients to where we would get leads that wanted hyper realism. And I was like an illustrator and I was like, I don't do that. But I had friends that did it. And I also had friends that were broke that did it very well. So I was like, yo, can I sell this for you? Like, I'll just be the agent, which at that time I didn't even know what it would be called. But I was just like, hey, if I sell your work, are you willing to like cut me in on some of the profit? I'll like negotiate everything. I'll handle all the difficult discussions. I'll get your insurance set up. I'll make sure that we handle the presentation of the art and the revisions so you don't have to deal with it. And then a couple people were like, yeah, let's do it. Because at that point, I just made a couple calls to a couple artists because I kind of started having the idea, like, what if we did this for artists? Because the reality is we have enough leads to do this. And that's kind of
Hmm.
how that was born. So we started kind of being this now agency. So in the art world, I say that we're a collective. I use the word agency a lot because it makes more sense to our clients, to like people looking in. But I do like to think of us as more of a collective because a lot of the artists that I work with, at least the ones that I work with really regularly, that are really easy to work with, pleasant to work with, the ones that we're really good friends. Like we all know each other now. Like we do group projects together, and we like like they know each other. They can call each other. I called them. Like that was kind of the culture that I wanted to build, was like a collective culture, not like this. Like no offense to Colossal or Muros or Global
Some of
Street
the other
Art.
consultants.
Yeah, there's a bunch of art agencies that are awesome. Like their work is beautiful, but they don't have the same sort of like they didn't have the culture that I wanted to create. I wanted to create like a collective feeling thing. Um,
Hmm.
and that's yeah, I guess that's kind of how the agency was born. It was born out of the fact that we had enough leads and I couldn't fulfill the demand. So I just decided like, and I was looking at it, it was like, why not hook some friends up, especially if they're really good at what they do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, and Derek, that's also a great approach. It's like, obviously the vast majority of artists that we interact with, talk to, interview, etc. Actually, all the ones we interview are incredibly generous people. But we've all met that artist that's like, if I don't want it, I just turn them down, and that's the end of it. Versus, what we promote and how we conduct ourselves and how you conduct yourself. It's like, I have more than plenty. Hey, so and so, like you'd be a great fit for this. Like, let's work on this thing together. And it's like that spirit of collaboration, or sometimes you just go, you don't even have to cut me on it. Like, it's yours. Merry Christmas. Like, I don't have to buy you anything. Bye. Like
right.
this is literally in your camp, in your field. This is your specialty. Just remember me down the road, one for you, one for me kind of thing. And
Right.
like these things multiply, there's like this karmic response to it sometimes where you just like generously give. And then they're like, actually, I have this lead for this mural that is more in your style than mine. Do you want it? It's like, yes, thank you for remembering me. So I love that approach because it's kind of like you said, and I'm glad you made that distinction. I don't know if a lot of artists are familiar with this. This happens both on the, quote unquote fine art side of things. It happens on the mural side of things as well. There's consulting agencies or art consultants that are, here's the art consultant who is a salesperson essentially, and they have a directory of artists, right? And they go hotel ABC, this is the budget, how many rooms they have to do plus the lobby, do they have for a mural or whatnot, and they just go down the list and kind of like cherry pick. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a relationship between the people running the ship and the sailors of the ship. And in your case, you're literally running the ship together. And while you're, of course, the main decision maker, I love that you're like, hey, are you available for this? Do you like this? Kind of like you're working, you're collaborating on it as opposed to being like just assigning stuff. And that's the end of that. They're not just, they're more than just your workers. They're more like, it's more of a team approach, if you will.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
absolutely
absolutely
not.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I always tell people that like like if we're at a job site together, I'm like, yeah, this is one of my I just say they're one of my partners because it's like the reality is like we are in a partnership. They're not like W-2'd under me, right? Like I'm still 1099ing with them, and it's like we're collaborating on this. Like I'm handling all the difficult client BS that a lot of artists don't want to deal with. Like I'll handle all the annoying stuff. You make the beautiful art, and like I think that's what most artists want to do, right? Like at least the ones that I talk to and that we mentor and consult with is like they don't want to do the business side. I love the business side, but a lot of them don't want to do it. So I'm like, yeah, let me handle the business side for you, and we'll like let you do the art. And yeah, and it's very much yeah, but we're really focused on like how do we build a community with this, not just like a transaction. I don't want it to
Yeah.
just be a transaction between me and the artist and the third party. I want it to be like something where we work together. Even if I can't get an artist on a wall because like maybe the clients that have come in the last 6 months, they didn't ask for that artist sort of work. I'll bring them into
Mhm.
webinars if they're someone that I feel like can offer value to our audience, which most of them can because we work with, I mean, I try to work with some of the best artists across the country that I can. So like I always am just trying to create more opportunities to pay artists and also to help to basically to pay an artist and for them to teach other artists how they can also get paid. Like that's kind of the whole idea behind Influential Walls is right. Like we're a community of people that all want to succeed together and bring everyone up around us as much as we can.
Oh, perfect segue because speaking of teaching, I mean, one of the niche that Influential Walls has gone into is schools, specifically schools in California. I'm sure you guys have it in other states too, but California is one that's mentioned a lot. Now, question for you, how do you tailor your approach when you're working in an educational setting? I mean, this is going to be a little bit different than corporate ABC just wants, this thing on their wall and that's the end of that. I mean, you're going into schools.
Right. It is a different approach. It's a very different sale, a much more sophisticated sale in terms of like pipeline and paperwork as well. There's just a lot that goes into it, which I can touch on a little bit if anyone listening to the podcast is interested in selling to schools, because schools do have
Mhm.
budgets. Schools don't have budgets for murals; they have budgets for education. Okay, and you have to think. My dad would always ingrain this in my head, especially when I had the when I was starting my clothing business. He was like, "You are not fulfilling a need, and if you are not fulfilling a need, then it's going to be harder and harder to generate the demand. But if you can fulfill a need, then the demand will always be there. So it's always about how do I position my art to fulfill a need? What need am I fulfilling? What need am I fulfilling? And I've noticed the more that I can position our work as a company to fulfill needs, the more money we generate, right? But like, so at first it was like the need that I'm fulfilling is, well, one, clothing has so many competitors, but I was like, well, one need that I'm fulfilling is for our sponsors. Like I'm helping, or not the sponsors, the nonprofits. Like I wanted to basically act as a sponsor for the nonprofit and giving them money regularly, right? But that need wasn't necessarily there unless I could create really strong relationships with the nonprofits, and I would have to show them that we're doing a significant amount of revenue, which we weren't. So like why would they entertain like serious partnership discussions if we're a really, really, really tiny company, right? So then when I started thinking about what sort of clients should I be approaching in the mural world, and I was like, who needs murals? Like, and there's a couple of people that need murals, right? Like at the time, I didn't understand how to sell to a real estate developer because that's also a sophisticated sale. But when you're doing that, I mean, you can make a crap ton of money selling to developers. But um, like I started thinking, what sort of companies do I need to sell to where we can position our art to actually fulfill a need? So I was thinking real estate developers because they have to beautify the building, dentists and doctors because they have a space that usually is not very warm and welcoming for patients that are going to feel uncomfortable. So that's going to help fulfill a need there more, right? Or doing something like we did a event with a censure that was at a trade show. It's like at those trade shows, they need to have community engagement. Like people need to stop at the booth. So what can we do to position the booth? And then with schools, my main approach with working with schools, one was like I wanted to get in there just to work with my middle school because I remember thinking like if I knew about this when I was in middle school, I would have wanted to do this a long time ago, especially if I knew I could make money. So I went into my middle school, painted with the kids, talked to the kids, and was like, "Yeah, the school is paying me $7,000 to do this." And they're like, "What the heck? They're paying you $7,000 to paint this?" And like that was kind of like the there was like a sense of fulfillment that came from working with the kids. And then also I started realizing after I talked to the principal and a couple other principals like after that was like the principals as a school organization you have set budgets kind of the same way that you would think about business, right? Like okay, I have to put money towards my marketing, my travel, my supplies, etc. Now in a business it's like you can fudge the lines a little bit and just pull money out of marketing and pour it into travel. Schools can't do that. Schools are very, very strict with how they can spend their budgets. So, like as far as beautification projects go, the funding is rather limited. But if you can actually tie like the mural into an educational component, it frees up a lot more funds. So we started thinking like, how can we actually sell a mural with education? Because the beauty with schools too, particularly public schools, is that they have to spend the money to get that money again next year. They have
Mm-hmm.
to spend the money, right? But the idea behind them is, well, where's the money going to be most impactful though? Because they already know they're going to spend the money. So how can you? I had to think like, how can I make my product so undeniable? Well, what if we paint them a piece of fine art on the giant building that's like from some of the best artists in the world? What if those best artists in the world teach kids about how they actually scaled and like grew their business? Can we, and like this is where it started getting a little bit more really hyper niche focused and like differentiating how we differentiate ourselves, which was like what can we do to incorporate California state standards into our educational process at schools, right? So now it's like I'm taking it a layer deeper instead of just being like, yeah, I'm just going to teach your kids about design. Well, what is the California State Education Board looking for? Like, what are some criteria we needed to meet? So I started going to meetings with like here, I'm in Orange County, California. So I started going to the Orange County Department of Education meetings. I would just sit there and I would just listen. And I would do this like month after month after month. And I would just like leave with notes and notes and notes of like, what do I need to do to make sure that our murals and like that our murals are really fulfilling all of these needs? Because if they are fulfilling all these needs and they're super beautiful, then why wouldn't they want to buy the product? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what they need to spend their money on. And they have to spend the money, right? And then, but then I also started realizing that selling to schools is very difficult. You have to have. Um, can I talk about this a little bit? Is this something that you think that might be useful to the audience?
Oh yeah,
Like how to
Yeah, I
actually
think that'd
sell
be
to a
great.
school?
the
Okay, so
patience of an
selling.
angel.
Yeah, so selling to a school is not just the same as like, all right, here's my contract, sign my contract, and we retain the copyrights, and we're going to do a design and 2 hours of revisions for you. It's not that simple. So when you go to work with the public school, particularly in California, and I'm not sure this is how it's going to work in other states, you have to go through the school for one round of approval, and then you have to go to the district, which manages the public school. So districts manage the schools. That's usually how it works in most states. Now, the issue is that some districts are easy to work with and some are not. The approval process working with the district is going to take you anywhere from 2 months on the very, very low end. I would say realistically 3 months to as long as a year to get that wall just to even start on the designs. It takes a very long time. You have to have different types of insurances. So most artists have the general liability insurance, which is great. But you also need to have workers' comp insurance. You need to have errors and omissions insurance, which is basically insuring against copyright infringement. And then you also, for some schools, you have to have something called sexual abuse and molestation insurance, which is incredibly difficult to get. Oh my gosh, the hoops you've had to jump through to get this insurance. And all of that alone, like your overhead each month just for the insurances is at least 1,000, like at least, right? So that's just like a cost that now that you're incurring on top of whatever else you're paying for each month. And then some schools are going to ask you for contractor's license, and I realize there's different sorts of contracts that schools have you sign. It's not just like, here's a contract. They actually usually have 2 to 3 different categories of contracts. So there's a lot that goes kind of into like understanding the school's sale. But another thing that I learned from working with schools is the more barriers to entry actually serves as a benefit to the supplier. In other words, the harder it is to work with a client, the better that might be for you as an artist if other artists are not willing to put in that work. Because I know that other artists would not be willing to put in the work that I put in to close a school deal. But I also have time on my side because I can delegate the painting, right? Like we can paint 3 murals at the same time while I focus on the busy work. Whereas artists, you might not have that same leniency. Like you have to wear all the hats, right? Which is also why I'm always really big on like artists hiring virtual assistants and training teams. Because even if you still want to be the face of your brand and paint the wall and do the art, you can still have people working for you. Like, do you guys think that Shepard Fairey doesn't have people working for him? Or like major people like Greg Mike? They got teams, they got squads of people painting their murals and like people in the office. Like, that's how you grow as an artist. You have to understand the basics of business, which is like, one, if you could replicate yourself, oh my gosh, the amount of time that you save replicating yourself, even just in like one category of the business, whether it's marketing or painting or sales, like you just earned like half your year back.
Yeah, yeah, you did. I mean, that's something that we've had some recent episodes regarding delegation and expanding your artist team. And
Mm.
yeah, that's definitely a big lesson I learned during my years in corporate. Expansion requires delegation. There is no way around it. Like you will get to a point, kind of like you said, especially if your lead generation is solid, whether you're doing it old school or it's coming in inbound word of mouth, it doesn't matter. If you have more demand than you have time, you have to delegate. Like there's no way around it. Like you can't multiply yourself. You can't add more hours to the day. You need to delegate, even if it's something small, you know. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
big proponents of that.
And I love, Derek, how you touched on that idea too of when you get to those maybe more complicated clients or one that have more barriers of entry, it inevitably is going to take more time, more attention to detail, potentially more insurance, which is a monthly overhead. So you want to make that insurance worth it, essentially. You're like, if I'm paying over $1,000 in insurance, I'm not going to be paying every month just to do one mural for the entire year. And that could potentially what it would be if it was only you doing it. So I love that idea of if you are going for these larger projects, potentially niching down, whether in style or type of client, but delegating when you can to make it worth it. Which kind of brings me to another question, which thank you again for bringing up all the details about schools too, because that's obviously one very specific type of client. So if any of our listeners are thinking about working with schools or have in the past, that may be some additional information that they can look into. But for just larger projects in general, especially when thinking about kind of that pivot point into 5 or 6 figure types of murals, what would a tip be that you would give artists looking to transition from their first handful of mural projects into those 5, 6 figure contracts for murals?
Yeah. So, like, just so you guys are aware too, I've done the 6 figure deals and I've like also lost 6 figure deals. But it's not just like they fall in my lap every single day. So I don't want to paint the wrong image. Just like, hey, yeah, like every single month we do a six-figure deal. I would love that, but that's not usually what that looks like. It's like we have those outliers that are like 2 to 3 pitches a year where we're like, okay, we're submitting a very large dollar amount to this client. Um, as far as six-figure deals go, it's really dependent on kind of who you're operating within. So when we talk about working within a niche, like you just briefly kind of said, like whether you're niching your style or your customer, there's a significant difference between niching your style and your customer. And I think that's something that's worth pointing out, because sometimes artists hear me say like you need to go into a niche and they're like, oh yeah, well this is the sort of stuff that I paint. And I'm like, that's not niching. That's your individual visual brand as an artist. That's your voice, right? And that is a must. As an artist, you have to have a different voice than other artists. Like it's just part of what you sell, right? So like niching isn't about what your art looks like. That should already be done. And if it's not, then that will come with time as you develop that and you start to learn the sort of things that you enjoy painting, things that you don't, and as you like are more experimental in your approach. But I would say that like I highly encourage people to niche their consumers and maybe not go all eggs into one basket immediately, but you might want to think in terms of like 3 different ideal audiences. Because when you find the ideal audience, you're able to solve that problem for them a lot easier. You're able to position your artwork as a solution to make it fulfill a need, right? And that's like one thing that we did with the schools is like I leaned into the education because now I could position my work to fulfill a need for that niche. And every email that I write, every time I'm on a call with someone, it's so specific to them and I'm like fulfilling their need, and they're willing to invest more money because I'm more specialized. But I use the analogy of sports a lot too, because sports, like, I mean, like if we're talking about the NBA, like how much money does the NBA bring in every year? You know, like if you can do
Endless.
endless amounts of money, right? Like literally endless amounts of money. So if you are thinking in terms of like working within a basketball niche, you could do basketballs, you could do basketball shoes, you could do basketball courts. Like there's so many ways that you can actually start positioning yourself to be more unique. And it's different for each artist because every artist has like their own things that they really care about. And for me, it is the education side. Both my parents like were teachers, and then my dad ended up turning into a broker. So like there was like a lot of things that I just pulled inspiration from them, and obviously in terms of kind of how I've approached my career. But like every artist is a little different. So I'd say for six-figure contracts, there's a number of things that go into six-figure contracts. One, are you fulfilling a problem? Like are you truly fulfilling a problem? I think that's a big one. Two, are you selling more than one wall?
Mm.
And because I think that most of those six-figure projects that come in, they're multi-wall projects, unless you're pitching directly to a developer who has like a 6, 7 story building and they're not doing a call for artists.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that I'll say goes really big for six-figure contracts is I talk about this a lot in our content, um, and with my mentees and in the mentorship program. I'll say that I want everyone to get really comfortable with 3-tiered pricing. So instead of offering one price to a client, we always offer 3. But the goal is to really, you have to pair it with also, like I pair it with price anchoring. So on my first call with a client, I'll usually say, okay, so Jackie, based on the scope of work that we're talking about, I know that you're looking to reach more consumers. We talked about doing that online and offline, and we're looking at a couple different opportunities as far as which walls you want to activate. I know we're looking at like 3 different options. I'm assuming this is going to cost anywhere from $120,000 down to $20,000. And I'll just wait for Jackie's reaction. And Jackie will either say, we can't spend more than 80K on this, where I will reply to saying, okay, no problem. I'll create 3 different packages hovering around that price for you, and I'll have those ready for you on our next call next week. Can we book a call next Wednesday or whatever? Now, sometimes the client will just say, like, imagine Jackie just says, I say, yeah, it's going to cost anywhere from 120 down to 20. She just says, okay,
That's
well,
great.
Jackie said, okay, so I'm going to submit a price for 120K. I'm going to submit one package option for 80K, and then maybe I'll submit one down for 40K because she didn't really seem to have a reaction to this really big range that I dropped. So it takes the pressure off selling the six-figure deal because I think a lot of artists get kind of scared to present one number that's six figures and then just get turned down. So I like to always have a couple offers where it's just like that high end offer is literally just being thrown out there. Like the client doesn't have to take it, but if they want it and they see the value in it,
Mhm.
but the importance is differentiating the packages and making that one really like the home run. Like this $120,000 package is going to give you full usage rights to all the art, so you can use it on your website, on merchandise. It's going to give you 3 murals, and it's going to come with an unveiling and maybe like one day of community painting or something like that. And maybe that might be a bit overkill. I don't know if I'd honestly maybe price that for more depending on what those walls look like. But that's kind of the idea, right? And the $20,000 package is like this is for one wall and a community paint day, or
Mhm.
something like that. So going into those large packages, it's like, are you solving a problem? Are you presenting your prices in a way that's easily digestible to the client and where you can actually kind of deliver six figures worth of value to that client? And one last thing I'll say about negotiating six-figure contracts is knowing how to find that audience, like knowing how to
Mhm.
find the people that have that sort of money, which largely comes into email marketing, which was what everyone always wants to dissect my brain about. So I'm assuming we're probably going to talk to about this
We will
call.
eventually get there. We won't rush
Yeah,
it. We won't rush it. We're
yeah,
still warming our way into that part of
right,
it. But
right.
um no, that's been, oh my gosh, super valuable info there. I do want to go back to something you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the difference between, like, say, your style, your voice, your brand versus like niching down and kind of go into that. Something you've mentioned in the educational stuff you have out there is the importance of elevating both the art and the brand. In your opinion, why is branding so critical, and what is one common mistake you see in this area?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of artists think that their brand is their logo and like how they paint, and that's like not your brand. So the common mistake that I see with artists is that they just think they just don't understand the full scope of what a brand is. Like is a brand is like the feeling that your customer gets. Like we did a webinar on branding, and one thing I learned from listening to like some stuff by Chris Do, which is like one of the goats of the branding world. For anyone listening to this that doesn't know Chris Do, he owns an agency called The Future. I actually paid for one of his courses, but essentially like you're creating mini brands every time you talk to someone. So whatever someone's experience is with you is part of your brand. So like the brand is really the feeling that people take from working with you. So to elevate your brand, it's not just changing your logo, it's not just changing the name of your business, it's not changing your colors. Like elevating your brand means making your processes better. It means yeah, making to a certain degree, of course, making your art better and the delivery of the art better. It also means just better positive brand association. Like when you talk to someone, are you respectful? Are you professional? Is that going to be something that's going to be like that sort of is that feeling going to translate from one person to another? Like one part of our what like let me put it this way. One part of our branding strategy as influential walls is to make sure that we offer value to artists in every way that we can. So we have free resources, we have the paid resources, we do the podcast. Like I have someone in my DMs that literally just DMs artists all day long. Like all they do is like they just go into accounts and they'll just be like, "Hey, really like your work. Where are you based?" And we do that a bunch. Like we get like probably 20 to 40 DMs a day, and that's just to create more positive brand association so artists know that we care about them. It goes the extra mile into extending a brand. So I guess one thing that I would say is like the most common mistake is just artists don't they think of their brand as visual and not as the processes and the personality, and like really refining what that personality and those processes look like. I think your content also has a lot to do with it as well. I mean, we do like I'm super picky with our content on the page in terms of like what the feed looks like and stuff because that's a part of your brand. It's just an asset for your brand. The website is a part of an asset for your brand, your process, all that stuff. So I could talk about branding for a full, I mean, we've done full like 90-minute webinars on it, but that's what I would say is the most common mistake is artists just don't fully comprehend what a brand is. And I think that I'm hoping that me speaking about it for anyone listening kind of helps you guys realize like there's a lot more that goes into it. It's just bettering your
Full
delivery.
package. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The art itself is only the tip of the iceberg,
right,
essentially.
right. Mhm.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think that's especially important when you're networking with other people, right? Whether it's fellow business owners, fellow artists, and that we know is one of your core messages is that importance of networking and showing up as your brand, kind of embodying that energy, that professionalism, as you were talking about. So I'm curious, how has collaborating with other artists helped shaped your career, and what advice would you give to artists who are seeking potentially mentorship in their industry?
you're the product of your five closest friends. It's just like as simple as like hang out with people that do it a lot better than you. Um, like
Mhm.
I mean, influential walls is like by definition a collective, but like a large part of our growth is attributed to it being kind of like this little mastermind group. You know, like I work with a bunch of top tier artists. Like we all learn things from each other about everything. Like I'm learning things about composition or about like I'm never going to structure a contract like that. Like after you see it from someone else, right? Or like learning things just even about like I didn't think that like making an art presentation that way would make it actually look more elevated for the client or whatever it is. So I'll say like as far as collaborating goes, like it there's also bad collaborations. There's some collaborations that will not necessarily serve you except to give you a lesson when you walk away from them. So I'm not going to paint the picture like every single collab is like perfect because that's not always how it goes. Like it's just part of dealing with people. Not every conversation you have with a person with a different personality is going to like necessarily go the same way as someone with a different personality. So I'll say as far as collaborating goes, like if you find the people that are ahead of you that are good teachers, like you just learn faster. The idea is the I said at the beginning of the podcast is the 10,000 hour rule, right? But if you have the right person in your corner that can save you 3,000 hours, make it a 7,000 hour rule for you to become an expert, those are the people that I want to hang out with. Like I attribute a huge amount of my success to like being obsessed with like Chris Doe, with Pander, calling Steve, like talking to my friends who are nerds about email marketing, talking to my friends who are nerds about sales, like everyone around me when I was growing the business. And still to this day, I still try to find these people. Sometimes they're harder to find. And I'm not trying to say that in any sort of cocky way. It's just like you kind of like in the art world, there's not a bunch of like people doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. So it's kind of harder to find them. I have to look in kind of other niches. But
Mhm.
yeah, like I'm always trying to be around people who are they're just where I want to be. Like if I could trade places with them, I'd be like, dude, I want to be there. Yeah, hang out with
Yeah, and
people.
I think that I love that idea too, especially one thing that I've heard that's always stuck with me is only take advice from people whose life you want.
Yep.
And so it's the idea of like, there's always going to be this artist saying, you have to do it this way. No, you have to do it this way. Or non-artists saying, no, you have to make this your art style. And you're like, you've literally never sold a piece of artwork before in your life. Thank
Yep.
you for telling me how I need to run my career. Got it. Like, I don't go and tell engineers how they need to do their job. So please don't tell me how to do mine. But there is so much power in people that have that experience, or they got the type of job that you want to get one day, or are part of a niche to be like, okay, how does the dynamic different than this? So yeah, I absolutely love that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I like too how you mentioned a couple of takeaways in there too. I like how you mentioned number one, that you give back, like they're learning from you as well. So you're bringing something to the table, not just fanboy, fangirling, not just like, please tell me everything how you do it. Like this is a collaboration. This is an exchange, whether, they're paying for services to learn from you, or you're learning from each other, you're bartering in some way, shape, or form, doing projects together, but it's not one-sided. There's actually, there's an exchange going on. So I love that, because I feel newbies sometimes get a little excited and they're like, oh, I want to do what you're doing, so tell me everything in like one paragraph. And it's like, no. Um, I will happily share. However, like I don't owe you anything, number one. And number two, like we need to establish a relationship of some sort. There needs to be some sort of exchange. And then the second thing that you mentioned that I think is key, and I feel like a lot of artists, I think, forget about this sometimes when we're in our own little world doing our art, it's hard enough to even leave like our art bubble, much less to talk people that are non-artists necessarily and like try to get those friendships. But there is so much to be gained. And again, both ways from talking to folks in other industries. Like they get to live a lot of times vicariously through us and our creative careers. And they're like, well, I have a 9 to 5. I wish I did what you did. And then on our end, we're like, yeah, but there's the CRM, client management system, that you are an expert at. Like, let's
Mhm.
talk. Can we get a coffee? Can we exchange some artwork? Like, actually, do you need a mural in your house? I'll give you a, good price if you help me set up a CRM. Like, there's all these different ways we can come together with folks that are outside of what could be seen as the obvious sphere of what we do. So I'm glad you highlighted that, because I think it's very easy to just stay with, oh, this type of artist. So I'm a sculptor, so all my friends are sculptors. I'm a painter, all my friends are painters, or for the most part, and not see other non-art areas as being mutually beneficial. So I love that. And then speaking of non-art sides that are also valuable, we have to talk sales and marketing skill. It's something you talk about, something we talk about. Um,
Mhm.
the question that you knew was coming. What
Yeah.
is your approach to cold emailing, and how has it impacted your business? We need to talk about cold emailing.
Yeah. So my approach to cold emailing is the way I approach honestly the rest of my business, which is not like most how most artists think. And I think that like also just really quick going back for a second and visiting on like I think that I think that influential walls would have hit a ceiling if I wasn't taking a lot of information from people in other industries. The reason why influential walls gets like has gotten to this point is because we innovate in some way, and the innovation comes from like observations that I make in other industries that I bring to the art world, and that is what we will continue to do because like each year our sales double or triple. Like there's no, oh yeah, this year is the same year as the last. It's like, what am I doing this year to innovate? And like, who do I need to talk to in other industries and be like, wow, that's really cool. What if we could do that in the mural world? I've come to discover as we were going deeper and deeper into the mural world, there is a significant lack of innovative development in this field. Significant. Like there's not really that many things being done in the mural world that are possible. And like I will not talk about all my ideas because I'm bringing them to fruition right now, but we have some big things coming in where it's just like, why is this not being done in the mural world? So, but as far as like my approach to cold emailing, like I was saying, it's kind of like my approach to all business, which is how do I automate this to where I can just, it can run itself. Like the idea is that everything can run itself so I can focus on more big picture strategy stuff. So with cold emailing, it's all about running it through an automation system where the system sends out the emails for me. So I don't have to sit there and manually type out the emails. When I first started the business, I was sitting there and manually typing out the emails, and I was doing it with my virtual assistant. We were both sitting there and typing out the emails. And there was a good return on our investment. But then when I learned that, like, instead of me and my assistant sending 50 to 100 emails a day between the both of us, that we could use an automation system that could send 100 to 500, I mean, to thousands of emails a day if you know what you're doing. Um, like it just I get my time back because it's so. I mean, if any of you guys have tried cold emailing manually, it gets exhausting. especially if you're putting down your head and doing it for hours. Like it's copy paste, copy paste, copy paste with like a couple few changes, couple few changes, couple few changes. Where's the email? Where's the email? Where's the email? So my cold emailing approach is use a software that finds the data for us. So we use data scraping tools. We pair them with automation softwares, and we have the email systems do the work for us. The hard part about email marketing is understanding spam filters and knowing what to do to avoid spam inboxes, knowing what to write in your email so you don't come off spammy, knowing things about kind of like the codes in your domain settings. It's a little technical, but like the hard part is kind of like the infrastructure setup and the spam score monitoring. But aside from that, it's pretty like I spend a lot of time with my mentees in our mentorship program, kind of like walking them through how to like become email experts, because the idea is when you learn email marketing, it seems daunting at first, but everything is hard at first. Like no matter what you pick up, if it's a new skill, it's going to be hard at first. And like the idea is a lot of the things that I teach in mentorship is not just like you finding an email software to send a bunch of emails and scrape the emails is not a difficult thing. I mean, just look it up on Google. Like you can find the softwares that do those sort of things. It's really just understanding how to use them at scale, and not have them work against you. Because once you start landing in spam, it doesn't matter anymore. You're sending 0 emails if they're all landing in spam. So the idea is kind of like understanding how to do that and write emails that are gonna convert. So in mentorship, that's what I spend probably like half my focus, maybe like a third of my focus on with students, because like a third of it is on the marketing and cold emails, like getting this automated. The other third is usually on sales and being comfortable on your sales calls, like handling people with objections or knowing when to budge on price, when not to budge on price. And then also understanding just long-term brand strategy. Like, is this approach that you're currently using, is it sustainable for the long run? And is it going to bring you to a place where you're happy doing this in the long run? Because, you could take the approach of painting logos all the time and paint a logo in a day because you don't do design work and churn them out for $1,000, $2,000 a day. And hey, if you can get one of those, every other day, you're making easy, and it's like there's minimal work to it, but also like, are you going to be happy doing that? But that's not a very difficult business to grow, like at all. But once you understand kind of how to find clients, but the question is, are you going to be happy doing that? But I hope that kind of answers my approach to cold emailing. It's just like running it through an automation system and saving the time. I like cold emails because I'm not at the mercy of the distribution of the algorithm on social media, because it doesn't guarantee who you're going to see. Whereas email marketing is like, all right, I get to control who sees my stuff, how many people see it. And
yeah. And that's
and
something we talk
it's a numbers
about.
game.
Yeah. And to your point, Derrik, email is kind of one of the few algorithms that in the past 20 years really hasn't changed too much. The only big change is the spam filter, right? It's figuring out, okay, what flags it, what doesn't. But other than that, you pretty much know, okay, when I send this email, at the very least, they're going to see it in their inbox. They may ignore it or they may kind of archive it. But when looking at the odds of the algorithm on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, you're really at the mercy, kind of sending it into the void, it can feel like sometimes. And so,
right. Yeah, and email marketing, when you understand it too, it's like you can look at how many people have opened your emails, how many people have clicked on your pitch deck, how many people have replied, and it's just kind of like a formula. It's like, okay, I have an average of a 30% open rate, which is like usually what I try to work with my students with. It's like, how do we get you to at least a 30% open rate? How do we get you to a 15% click rate, which is going to lead you to about 2 leads per 100 emails?
Yeah.
2 per 100. Like, it's not like you can send 20 emails this week and hopefully get a lead. Like, that's not going to work. You have to churn them out. And then like the idea is really understanding email marketing enough to set yourself up to learn how to send 500 a day, because then it's like, all right, if I send 500 a day and we take a 2% average return for leads, like that converts about 10 leads a day. Now it's going to be a hit or miss. Some days you might not get any. And then at the end of the week, you're like, oh, I got like 4 leads today. Um, but that's
Yeah.
why I like cold emailing, because you can actually create a formula to it. Whereas content, you kind of can. It's easier to make a formula with ads, but with ads you have to continue to feed the beast. You always got to pay. You always got to pay to play. Whereas email marketing is like a subscription fee. Like, okay, you
Mm-hmm.
spend $100 a month, instead of with ads. It's like, all right, I'm gonna test with $50 today. Let me test $50 today. Okay, I didn't do anything. Let me test with $100 here, $200 here, and it's just like you start churning through this ad spend. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're just really just you're just throwing your money
Anyway.
away.
Absolutely. And I love that intentional strategy behind the email marketing as well. So that's a great tip for artists who are looking to get into it. But to take a few steps back for some of our artists who maybe are just starting out with murals, maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed, what advice would you recommend as like easy first steps if, let's say, they're an emerging or established artist, but transitioning into the mural space? What would be the good first step for them?
Realizing that a mural is just a large canvas. It's like not really the I think that particularly for me at the beginning, I thought muralists were like this elite group of artists, but it's just like, no, you just need a projector. Like,
Yeah.
if you have a projector, you can paint a mural because you just draw you well, well, if you have a projector and you know how to do digital art, I'd say, like, if you know how to do digital art, which I think if you want to be a professional artist and you aren't doing digital art, you are going to have a very hard time. Like, we are in a digital era, do digital
Yeah.
art. I've artists that like, oh yeah, I don't really mess around in Procreate or whatever. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what? I don't know. I've had, it's very few, but like some artists are like, yeah, I send them like photos of like a sketch I drew on paper. I'm like, what? Are you serious? Like, that's not a good look for the brand. Like, make it look more elevated. But anyways, like as far as like being at the beginning, if you have a projector and know how to do digital art, it's kind of just color by numbers. Um, I think the one of the most intimidating things at the beginning as a muralist is like you don't want to mess up the wall. So you're like, do I
Mm-hmm.
prime this wall? Do I not prime the wall? Do I need to protect it? So just as far as basics for priming goes, paint adheres to paint. So if there's paint on the wall, paint will adhere to it. If you're painting on brick, if you're painting on metal, if you're painting on concrete floors or something like that, that's not an ideal first canvas to work with. Like drywall, stucco, um, maybe like a primed brick, but yeah, I'd say at the beginning, just know that paint adheres to paint. Don't give yourself a metal wall or an exposed brick wall to start on. That's going to be a really high learning curve. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Start with a simple wall. Don't ask for a lot of money. Like, it's your first mural, just get your feet wet, learn how to do it.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Latex paint, so you don't spend a bunch of money on acrylic paint like me. Uh,
Also, you could do it in somebody's home, your own home, a
yes,
friend's house, you know. Yeah, no, I like
yes,
that. There's several options, but I like what you just said because I think I mean, it's easy to go, oh, okay, I really want to do murals. They seem very attractive. I want that giant wall on the side of that building that's 7 stories high. And you've never even done one. Please do one, a small one, and, find out if you even like it. It's different physically, anyways, too. Also, I like that you mentioned projector, but also learn what a grid is. You need to grid. Sometimes the projector doesn't fit or can't shine enough. Like, learn to grid, y'all. But I like those themes and I like that idea of like you have to keep it at least somewhat simple, but it is essentially a giant. Or actually, I like to think of it, it's not just a giant painting, it's a giant painting commission. Like you're gonna have to work
yeah,
with a client. No,
yeah. So
normally they don't let you do whatever you want, which is
right.
fine,
Yeah,
which is fine.
you're not gonna do
Compromise is fine.
anything.
They're giving you money for this, so it,
Yeah,
it's all good. But Derek, real quick, one thing that we love to do with our guests is we like to ask them how they define success, but we're going to take a quick word from our sponsors first. So we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artists podcast supporters.
If you have gotten value out of listening to our podcast, please consider becoming a supporter for $4 a month. This podcast is our way of sharing it forward, and we get so much value out of these conversations ourselves, but producing a podcast isn't free.
We have personally invested in podcast equipment and video editing software, as well as dedicate our time to produce, edit, and distribute a new episode every week.
By becoming a podcast supporter, you will help us keep the podcast running smoothly and get access to amazing off-the-record conversations with seasoned artists, authors, art collectors, gallery and museum professionals, as well as industry leaders. These conversations offer even more valuable advice for artists at various stages of their career.
You also get access to our artist community platform and our gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Head on over to levelupartisthub.com to sign up and become a podcast supporter today.
Welcome back, everybody. So, as you all know, every guest that we have on the podcast, one of the questions we love to ask is, how do you define success? In this case, as an art professional.
Yeah, we just define success as how many artists we're helping make rich. Like, it's pretty simple. How many artists can we, like, how many dollars can we generate for other artists is like a big metric for us. Like, the money that I'm making is significantly less important. I mean, I do see the money that Influential Walls makes as important to like throw back into how to make more resources, but the biggest like the biggest metric that we pride ourselves on is how many artists we're able to actually help. Yeah.
I love that. Now, looking back to the beginning of your creative journey, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started?
The thing is, I got a lot of good advice and I just didn't listen to it. Because my dad was a broker, right? So like he would talk to me all the time about like what it would be like kind of going and doing it in the mural, and I eventually listened to him. Let's see. One piece of advice that I wish I had, or even just like maybe had even listened to. I think that really the biggest thing for me was like you're the product of your five closest friends. It's like you have to spend time with the people that you want to become like. And honestly, one thing I will say too is I guess this is a piece of advice that maybe is good. You being the product of your five closest friends, one of those friends doesn't even have to be someone you know in person. Like that's one thing that I really learned is like, if I just sit down and study the crap out of this person and how they live their life and their business model, I can actually replicate it even without having ever spoken a word to them, but I have to study them really, really in depth. And like, I think that helped me a lot at the beginning because it felt like if you guys know like Gary V or I've never met Chris Doe, but like I loved his content so much. I've spent so much time digesting it, even in his course that I paid decent premium for. I never met him. And I was like, I just started to think like that because I was like, literally, I would just listen to it like on repeat. So I guess if there's one piece of advice I could say is you can actually become a lot like someone, even if you haven't met them before, so long as they are like one of those voices that's influencing you, like, say 20% of your life, probably your five closest friends, right? Like they're that voice that you hear 20% of the time. You can become.
I think that's so true. I kind of refer to them as like my virtual mentors because like they don't know that they're mentoring me, but obviously they're putting out content, they're putting out Instagram reels, podcasts, seminars, doing all the things and just being able to be a sponge for their content. It feels like you know them very intently. And also you're observing them. You're observing, okay, over the last 6 months, how has their strategy changed? And especially if it's a thought leader in an industry that you really respect, that you're trying to replicate, that can be so powerful. We've talked about on the podcast in the past, especially I think that's important no matter what part of your creative career you're in. It definitely helps at all phases, but remembering even the days of commuting to a day job, working at like an hourly wage. It was like, okay, I'm gonna make this 45-minute commute worth it. Where I was like binging audiobooks and podcasts, and during breaks, I was like listening on my AirPods to this book and that book to just like be all consumed in it. Which is debatably more intent of a relationship than even a physical best friend that you see like twice a week, right? You're like, this person is with me all the time, and I am just like living and aspiring to live the life that they're living and taking action on it too, which is the key.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree. And yeah, that's another thing too, like you said with that commute, turning your car into a classroom. That's something that I also
Yeah.
really adopted at the beginning of my career too, is my car was my classroom. If I'm in the car, I'm listening to education, I'm not listening to music. At this point in my career, I'm constantly digesting business information. So now I listen to music in the car. But at the beginning, I didn't used to do that. It was always business, 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 business. And now it's like, okay, my whole life is about business. Now I'm going to unplug a little, but at the beginning, it kind of has to all be about business if you want to grow a successful business. It's just part of the game.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think I would add to what you both said too, of like as you do consume this information from these other thought leaders and folks you're inspiring to always be, I guess, aware slash mindful of what applies to you and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Like take what you want, discard what you don't need, or back burner it. Because I feel like for some folks it might be like tempting to be like, I want to be exactly like that. And it's like, well, it depends what stage of life you're in, what your financial situation looks like your family situation or their kids in the picture, like some of that may not apply right now. It might have to wait, or it might not be a good fit, and that's okay too, because then in being aware of what applies and what doesn't, you can also be more mindful. I'm not going to say more demure, I did it, but you're going to be more mindful.
uh,
I'm not sorry. Actually fine tune the right people that should be in that sphere of influence. So it might be like, actually, there's this other person that's somewhat similar to this person whose content I'm consuming, but this one's actually more applicable. And the way that they're structuring their business actually gives me better ideas. Like there's more I can take from this, and you can just pivot and shift and find the right people. But if you're just like, oh, yeah, yeah, that's cool. But it's a good idea to always keep an eye on that. But random question that we like to ask everybody. If somebody hands you $100, yes, I know maybe we have to make it bigger for California, but let's say it was $100. I know Californians and New Yorkers, you all get like 200 in our example, but what would you splurge on or invest in? It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
this is like if I was handed us 100 or the California premium, say we say $200. Like it, this is if I was handed it now, or like if I
Yeah,
was at the beginning of my career.
right now. Right now.
Mhm.
200 bucks has
Random
to be
crispy bill shows up.
related to my business.
Mhm.
Or art.
Um, hmm. What do I need? I just upgraded all my. I would definitely do something with tech, that's for sure, because I kind of have everything else that I. Mm, yeah, I can't really get a nice piece of work for 200 bucks. I'd say maybe commission an artist. That's not that much.
Yeah.
So I'd probably buy a nice microphone.
Yeah.
I have a mic that's like I can like hold it. I have like the Rode. I don't know if you guys know mics. I have like the Rode mic, so I can like hold it. But I think
Yeah.
if you get like more of like a seated mic,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I'm planning on doing a lot more content where I'm actually positioned exactly where you guys see me positioned right now and speaking to webcam, because I want to do more like kind of like tech demo stuff on like how I grow the business. So I'd probably do that. Um,
Nice.
I love the tech side of things, so it's like I like tech and art both. So I'd
Hmm.
buy that mic.
Plus, that's
Yeah,
a great
Same.
investment to your point. It's like helping these systems just become better and better with where you're going. So
Hmm.
that makes
right,
total sense.
right. Yeah, I feel
Just
like
taking that excitement to the content creation side of things when you're like new drone to us. Yeah.
yeah,
Not
exactly.
necessary, but exciting anyways.
Yeah, my answer probably isn't as fun as other people's because it's like, I don't know. I kind of have like the things that already make me happy. So I just add more fun, I guess, equipment that would just make my content look nicer, I guess. Yeah.
That's a perfectly solid answer. Now, Derek, do you have any exciting projects you have coming up that our listeners should know about?
Yes, we do. So
I heard something
this
about
is
Austin.
yeah, this is really exciting. So we're coming to Austin, Texas on November 15th and 16th. We're doing a mural summit. So we're gonna have a panel of artists speaking who have grown successful businesses. We're going to do an after party. The next day, we're going to do a spray painting workshop. It's a 2-day event. And then at night, we're going to be working with Secret Walls, which is something that you guys are getting the first scoop on because we haven't advertised it yet. For anyone that doesn't know Secret Walls, they're like the biggest mural competition company. They do like one team versus another team. They have like an hour and 30 minutes to like paint walls. Then the end of the competition, a guest judge comes in and they like judge the art and they ask the crowd. There's dancing, music, drinks. If you're in Austin, we'll be posting about it soon. We'll be selling tickets. The tickets are going to be pretty cheap, like $30 to get in. Um, we just we're just like super stoked to do that. That's probably the biggest exciting thing that's like right around the corner. We have a couple things that we're working on. The mentorship program is getting a facelift for sure. We're adding a bunch of new resources in there that are super exciting, but that's a little bit of a longer play. Secret Walls is in November, which is next month. So that's our big exciting project is Secret Walls Battle and the Mural Summit, which is kind of like one of those things I was talking about earlier. I was like, why are there not mural trade shows? Like this should be a thing. Like we have mural festivals, but there's not like a lot of trade shows. So this is going to be our proof of concept. Got to see how it goes out there, and hopefully, if that goes really well, then we do a couple of these a year, where we go to different cities, have like experts come out and speak, and then do some sort of fun, entertaining thing too, whether it's a competition or I don't know, something else, some sort of live.
Yeah. Instagram, the best place to find out this info?
Yeah, Instagram is probably where we're most active right now. If or you guys can subscribe to our email list. On our email list, you get freebies too. You get free guides for you get a free mural marketing guide, you get a free mural pricing guide, and we'll definitely be sending out an e-blast to our subscribers too, saying we're coming to Austin. So
Yeah,
Excellent. I already get
awesome.
your newsletter, so looking forward to it.
Yes, and if in future iterations of this project, if you happen to come to Raleigh, North Carolina, we are submitting that city for a potential location. That would be amazing because you're so
oh
right.
yeah.
Having an industry-wide conference of like, here are these types of brushes, here are these types of materials. You can get hands-on experience, potentially working with some of the equipment to test out what you like. All other industries have these types of events. Why are they not for murals? We highly support that.
And we will make it happen. Well, that's not my top priority. I want to see how this goes, but if it does go as well as we think it's going to go, then I'm like, we should definitely do this a couple times a year. And I would love to come to,
Mhm.
because you're in North Carolina, right?
Yep, we're in
Yeah,
Yeah,
Raleigh.
yeah, I'd love to see you come over there.
Yeah.
I think that I mean, there's enough major cities for us to stop by, probably almost every state to do something cool. But
Oh yeah.
um, yeah, I'm building low key, starting to build out a team for the event side. So it's a
nice.
slow build. Yeah,
1.0, version 1.0, as we like to
yeah,
say.
yeah. Hmm.
Super cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Real quick before we go, how can our listeners stay in contact with you after they listen to today's episode to hear more about exciting projects like this and other things that you have in the works?
Yeah. Anyone can DM us. We're pretty active in there. We do get a lot, so sometimes we don't get to things right away, but we do try to reply to like every single DM that we get, and then DM, email, and yeah, our mentorship program. If you guys are looking for more like one-on-one help for an extended period of time, we do the mentorship program too, where like we screen share, look at your business model, and figure out what needs to happen to get you guys to 100, 200, 500K, whatever your goals are. And yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure to link the Instagram and your website and all these things on the show notes. Derrik, thank you so much for being with us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It was such a pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, for our listeners, if you want to stay connected with us between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio across all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.